Loud and loud. Anyways, so yes, Pier 1. On your tables, there's a QR code if you want to sign up for today, or you can just show up. It's at 12 o'clock. Love to have you. It's a great place to learn more about our church, what it takes to be a member, how we do some church. You can ask any question you want, that kind of thing. We're kind of an open book when it comes to that. We don't want to be hiding anything from you guys. So please join us if you feel led to learn more about our church and become a part. The other thing I'm excited about is I am excited about getting some of the church stuff back online. You know, as we move into this next phase, we're working on the summer schedule and summer plans, and we want your input. As we go down this road, we're actually going to be doing some more Q&A with you guys in the sense of asking you what your thoughts are on certain things. We live in a time where some things we're probably going to bring right back online as was. Other things are going to change because we live in a new era. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different. And so as we move towards this, the leadership of this church wants to know what you're thinking. So feel free. We are in a series called The Meaning of Life, which is, of course, I believe, probably the biggest question you needed to ask ever since you were 7 or 8 years old. Because it took till you were 7 or 8 before you realized life ended. So the reality of the meaning of life, well, why should I do anything in life? What is the purpose? What is the meaning? What has substance in life? Solomon was gifted by God with wisdom. I mean, he couldn't get rid of it. It was a gift. He was a wise young man who asked for it, but then I think there were times he didn't always want it. And so as we go through this series, I want you to realize he is really going to kind of slap us with what has real meaning. Not that things don't have value, but do they have meaning, substance? Or as the word he put it would be hevel, which in the English typically, and that's what makes Ecclesiastes more of a downer in the English, is they always use it and translate it meaningless. It's not really that. It's not that it has no value. When we think of meaningless in the English, we think of no value. No, he means it has no substance, no feel to it. Like your breath. Doesn't last. Like smoke. And so what we've covered so far was education. He actually started by saying his education is chasing after wind, academia. Chasing after wind, knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge and wisdom. In fact, it brings a bunch of grief and sorrow. Why? Well, that's last week. You should listen to that on YouTube. But now he comes to a different section. He intentionally is testing everything on this planet and whether it has meaning. And today is in Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. I'm going to read it to you first because there's a bit of poetry in the way this author writes. He was very gifted in the way he wrote things. Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11, he said, I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was hevel, meaningless, smoke and breath. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself, by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water, to irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born literally into my household. I had so many. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I stood back, I like to say stood back and looked, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. Boy, that's a downer, sort of. Sort of. I want to remind you, Solomon, as he points out, what does not have meaning in life is prodding us. He prods us to understand without God, they have no substance. They are like smoke or breath. What value they have does not last. It doesn't last. Last week we dealt with education. In the economy of God, the knowledge we have will be meaningless when the new heaven and new earth appear. It's fascinating when you think of God and what he does. And so Solomon now, he deals with pleasure. Not just deals with it, he engages it, he goes after it, he pursues it, he invests in it. He says, this pleasure, the feelings of this body, if I could just wake up every morning and saturate those feelings with everything they want. And so the question has to be raised. Will pleasure bring you a meaningful and substantive life? And let's put it in a good frame. Solomon put it this way. He said, looking for the good things in life. Because that's the way it is. When someone is filling their life with pleasures, that's their attitude. It's like, I'm looking for good things. That's the way you feel about it, right? Isn't that the experience you're looking for? Good things, things that are good to me, things I think are good. So let's take a look at his pleasure. First he said, I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found it too was meaningless. This is interesting too because he's incredibly intelligent, second wisest man in the history of the world. And he starts out his little reasoning as he's attacking people who want to know, why would you say that? And he attacks the reasoning first, and he gives his statement of what he's going to come to. He's not hiding it. He says, listen, it's non-substantive. It doesn't last. It doesn't have the complete meaning you need to look for in life, the purpose you need to have. And what I also find fascinating, you should make note of this search for pleasure in life has gone in and out of every generation. Every generation has sought personal pleasure. Historically, it's reared its head in many different words, even religions. Today, what we call this is hedonism. In fact, Merriam-Webster's definition of hedonism is the doctrine that pleasure or happiness is the sole or chief good in life. And dictionary.com, if you're more digital, says it's a devotion to pleasure as a way of life. The doctrine that pleasure or happiness is the highest good in life. More than Christianity in the American culture, this is the church. I find that even within Christians, this is the church. They will claim God but live for pleasure. Do you see that? And of course, our own Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of what? Happiness. That's my right. Absolutely, it's your right. You are free to seek pleasure. What I will say is that you will find, like Solomon, no substance. It's our current national anthem. If you strike against it, you're considered an enemy of the state. If I say to our society that Disney has destroyed the truth, and by the way, I really like Disney. I have friends that actually drew for Disney. But is it the happiest place on earth? Have you been in the lines? Anybody? Anybody? You strike any of our happy institutions, and you're dangerous. In fact, St. Augustine said it this way as far as the pursuit of pleasure. He said, we are certainly in a common class with the beasts. Every action of animal life is concerned with seeking bodily pleasure and avoiding pain. What is the difference between you and the animals? You see, in a hedonistic culture, there really isn't any. I told a friend of mine, I said, you realize that we're being raised in a hedonistic culture? He goes, no. And I said, well, just take a look around. Examine what hedonism is and what we're doing in our culture. And all of a sudden he came back to me, and he was a Christian raised in the church. He goes, it's true. I mean, it's true. I mean, like on every level, it is true. The first thing Solomon deals with is he deals with amusement. He said, so I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? Laughter is silly. Now, again, listen to me very carefully. He's not saying it has no value or that there is not a place for a bit of silliness in your life. Here's what he is saying. If that's your pursuit in life, it's meaningless. If your pursuit in life is to go to the latest comedian all the time or to watch a ton of movies or to go to amusement parks for the rest of your life, if that is your pursuit, pleasure, and it's about laughter, the musing of oneself, it's silly. That's what he's saying. He's not saying there's not a place for it. He's saying it's not the thing you pursue with your life. And yet, guess what? Many people do. Some people spend more time playing games than following anything else. Gaming is their life. Pleasure and the pursuit of entertainment is their life. We've created industries about it. The gaming industry passed up Hollywood years ago with revenue. Why? Because we like to interactively game and seek pleasure. The other one Solomon then deals with, get this list. Here's how you could tell you're a hedonist. If amusement is a priority in your life. Second of all, he goes to alcohol. I say alcohol because for him it was wine. Beer wasn't quite invented in, Egypt yet, that whole thing. So that was his version of all that. Alcohol. And he says, this is what he says, after much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. Let's get happy. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. So in this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in the world. I'm going to get toasted. And by the way, welcome to the Napa Valley region. It is a lifestyle, don't you know? There are interesting facts. The only fact I found one fact I found that was interesting is drinking as an issue in society has been consistent probably for centuries. People have always been drinking, abusing it, hurting others with it, all that. It's been around, obviously, since Solomon and before, right? I did discover one thing, though, that was concerning, about it, is that 32% of all traffic deaths come from an alcohol-impaired driving situation. So I think that, there's a cultural issue there, but he says it's foolishness. I clutched at foolishness. Get this. You got to understand this. He was so smart. He was like, I just want to get rid of wisdom, basically, and clutch at foolishness. And foolishness is really the lack of good sense and judgment or discretion. I just want to put away discretion, right? Just live frivolously. I don't have to think about others and the impact I may have and care about others. That's too heavy a burden. I just want to be silly and foolish. We all have something of that in our life. Benjamin Franklin was I think what I would call a closet hedonist. They didn't typically use that word, but he was definitely self-indulging. And he makes this statement. He says, "Many a man thinks he's buying pleasure when he is really selling himself to it." How many hours have you sold to the devil? At what price? Cost of a ticket. Man, ouch. That's that prodding. That's that goad that Solomon does so well. He then attacks achievement. He said, "I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves." Dude, this guy sounds like he could live close by, right? It's like, I think I met Solomon the other day at the restaurant. This is like our culture. Build more, get more. Again, he's dealing with this from the aspect of seeking personal pleasure. He's not dealing with materialism. He's dealing with pleasure. He's saying, this makes me happy. I thought of myself. How many people are caught in that? They feel like success in life is, achievement in life is all around how much stuff, right? We even have that phrase, right? The man with the most toys. What does that mean? The gratification of self. It's huge. Power was the next one he attacks. He said, "I bought slaves, men and women. Others were born in my household. I had so many slaves that gave birth to their children in my household. I also owned large herds, flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me." Translating this into contemporary English is a little difficult because the reality is during the time of Solomon, kings did this. It doesn't make it right, but he had a ton of slaves. In fact, during the Roman Empire, during the Bible, the writing of the Bible, a third of the population was enslaved from all over. The Romans didn't care where they enslaved you. They didn't care about the color of your skin, the country you were from. They just had it as an institution. Solomon said, "Look at all the slaves I had." A modern equivalent would be to say something like, "I had a whole lot of people who worked for me. And I owned cattle ranches and chicken ranches, and I had all kinds of stuff. I had power. I had power over people because I wanted to feel good about myself." Doesn't it make you feel good when you have power? Isn't that what our country's about? Giving everybody a voice and having power. Power to the what? And I'm not saying we shouldn't have freedom and equality. What I am saying is that the pursuit of life that brings meaning? And what Solomon is saying is no. How could you say that? Because there is only one who is all powerful. And most power is born out of pride and arrogance, self-righteousness, a desire to please oneself. There's probably nothing more selfish than to be a hedonist, because I care less about you, more about how I feel. If I get married and I fall out of love with you, I don't feel the same as I used to, then we're just going to get divorced. It's all over our culture. Explore it for yourself. The next one he attacks is wealth. Ouch. Ouch. I collected great sums of silver and gold and Bitcoin. And I had to throw that in. Anyways, the treasure of many kings and provinces. Remember, he had all the kings would come to him for his wisdom and bring their money. I hired wonderful singers like U2. And Bono was great at my house when I brought him over. Both men and women. Adele, probably have Adele over. I had many beautiful concubines. People get upset at the Bible when it talks about multiple marriages and concubines. And I agree, because I disagree with the behavior, but I disagree with the people's attitudes too. Promiscuity is rampant in our culture. The idea of sleeping with more than one woman, one man, having multiple sex partners, seriously? At least Solomon told you he did. We like to just propagate it as a part of culture. I mean, to stay pure, virgin, it's like, that's a joke, isn't it? That's what our culture does to it. It's offensive to me. Concubines were for pleasure. You realize Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines? Exactly. I'm thinking the sheer headache and mass of that would be just like a nightmare. Now, realize this, though. I want to give him a little bit of defense. Not defense for that, because I don't agree with that at all, but defense in the sense of kings during the time would give and take in marriage for power, to also bring allegiance to another country. And so Solomon, being one of the greatest kings of his time, had built relationships with all these other kingdoms and kings and countries, and he had accepted brides. But then he also had made mistakes, and he brought on his own concubines during his exploration of pleasure. I bet most of them came. He was promiscuous. Like, people don't like to hear that, because Solomon, I'm going to meet him in heaven, but the reality is he had 300 concubines. And of course, we condemn that. Absolutely. Do you condemn the promiscuous behavior, lifestyle, and teachings of our culture as well? As passionately? Hard to say. And it was seen that was wealth. That was wealth, right? The last thing he talks about is fame. Fame is a big thing for self-pleasure. He said, so I became greater. Because of all these things, I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. It stayed with me. And this is an interesting statement. First of all, he became famous. Solomon is famous. Even if you don't know Jesus, there are many people who have heard of Solomon, and Solomon's gold, and Solomon's wealth, and all this other stuff. They've heard of Solomon. He became famous. And in the midst of his pursuit of pleasure, in the foolishness of it, and the clinging to it, and the ridiculousness of some of it, literally, his wisdom never failed him. The gift God had given him when he was a young man, the gift he had given him, never failed him. It stayed with him. He couldn't get rid of it. Even when he was drowning in alcohol, he knew what he was doing. It didn't go away. He could not escape wisdom. And that makes him the very best person to write about. Does all of this bring any meaning to life? And we're taught, seriously, we are taught our whole life to do these things because these are the things that have value. You know they do, but the problem is the value is fleeting like your breath or smoke in the air. So then he goes and he talks about this unbounded pleasure. He says, anything I wanted, I would take. Notice he didn't ask. See, because if you're selfish and it's all about you, you're not really asking people whether you want that. You're taking what you're desiring. I denied myself what pleasure? None. I even found great pleasure in hard work. A reward for all my labor. It just felt good work. I've met how many men, how many women even could be workaholics? We have a word for it now, workaholics. But I love this last thing. As he gets to the hevel of it, the smoke of it, he says, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so non-substantive. It was like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. You see, hedonism worships the flesh. It is selfish by nature. Like I said, it's not that your desires don't have value. It's that so much of it has not the meaning you need in life, nor is it what you should pursue, nor purpose. Any of these. If you look at that list and you say, wow, I've pursued all those, then those are your gods. Don't second guess your heart, your desires. You desire pleasure. Who doesn't? Oh, come on. I'm not saying you should have a miserable life. What Solomon was trying to tell you was, as a way of having a purposeful, meaningful, substantive life, these aren't it. In fact, in the New Testament, now let's bridge it, because here's the deal. I got to be honest. I'm going to confess. I like this. It's a huge bar of chocolate that was gifted to me. And I've just set it on my desk at home, just admiring it. I like chocolate. I like milk chocolate, Swiss chocolate. I like chocolate. And that desire, there's nothing intrinsically evil with chocolate, unless you put a lot of it in your mouth and it goes to your waist and says, I think I'll stay here a few months. But this chocolate is good stuff. Chocolate has a history. It was invented by the monks. I love the monks. They also helped invent our modern beer. But anyways, that's besides the point. But this pursuit of hedonism in our culture today, Solomon would sit there and say, it's meaningless. And in the New Testament, when you get to the New Testament, it says that these desires, this is actually the source of a lot of your conflict. This is a lot of your problem in life. In James 4, 1 through 4, I just want to read this to you. He says, about the feuds and the struggles that exist among you, as he's speaking to the church and Christians who have been led astray by these things, where do you suppose they come from, your struggles? Can't you see that they arise from conflicting passions within yourself? See, you crave for something and you don't get it. You're jealous, you're envious of what others have got, and you don't possess it yourselves. So consequently, in your exasperated frustration, you struggle and fight with one another. You don't get what you want because you don't ask God for it to begin with. And if you do, when you do, he doesn't give it to you, for you ask it in quite the wrong spirit. You only want to satisfy your own desires. You're like an unfaithful wife, flirting with the glamour of this world, never realizing that to be the world's lover means becoming the enemy of God. Paul dealt with it in his day. You know what they called this thinking in his day? The Greeks had a word for it. The Romans had a word. They called it Epicureanism. It was an actual school. Epicureanism. The goal of life is to gain pleasure by avoiding suffering and grief and pursuing happiness and satisfaction. That's the goal of life. Epicurus, he lived in 300 BC, 3 and 400 BC. But the interesting thing about Epicurus is he started these schools within Greek. He was a Greek philosopher. And he started these schools, and these schools took off, and they exploded. After he died and stuff, at its height, Epicureanism had 400,000 schools. Some would call them communes because they kind of lived together. One of his principles was community. Another fascinating thing about that is that when Christianity came into Rome through Jesus, it not only attacked what was left of Epicureanism, but a lot of those schools became monasteries. They built monasteries on the sites of the schools. And again, I thank God for that because now I have chocolate. In Acts, Paul was in Athens. He was waiting for his brothers, Silas and Timothy, to meet him there. And he began to preach in the marketplace. And in Acts 17, it says that there were a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. And some of them asked, "What's this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. But later on, you find that some of the people became followers of Paul, and they believed. It was the beginning of the church. The beginning of a church that would do away with 400,000, probably far less than that at that point, schools of hedonism. Why? Because Christian love is better than worldly pleasure. Did you catch that? Christian love is better than worldly pleasure. Throughout every generation, this idea of the pursuit of pleasure will rear its head. It's done it here. Think about it this way. Some people became followers. What is it you follow? What's your feed? What do you follow on your phone? Who do you follow? What do you follow even on news, on TV, or with media? What are you following? You see, what you follow is really what you love. You follow an education. You follow pleasures. You follow amusements. What is it you're following after? Your heart's desire. Or is it a desire to follow Jesus? In fact, ask the question, are you in love with Jesus? Think about it. What do you find pleasure in? Notice what the New Testament tells you to do with it. Mark 12:30 says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength." The second, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. You see, the first thing he mentions is a question of the heart. The heart is where your desires are seated in Scripture. What is it you desire? Where is your heart? Where your heart is, your treasure will be also. Ouch. Ouch. It is a painful reality of our culture. You got to ask a simple theological question, which you've really never heard enough probably of. Are you on this planet to please God or to please yourself? And if you're on the planet to please God, what brings him pleasure? You see, the last statement I like to make is the most meaningful and substantive life begins when we discover bringing him pleasure becomes our pleasure. When we sit there and say, I enjoy pleasing God. But I want to please myself. This emblem is not an emblem of pleasing self. Did you know that? Our salvation is based upon someone who would go somewhere and do something that was not about pleasing self. It was about love. And love was not defined by the pleasures you seek. It was defined by the sacrifice you made. Unconditional love. Not to just love people, but to love your enemy. The ones you don't like. The ones you don't like, you need to love them. Why? Why did Solomon eventually get to this place where he made these statements? He's not there yet, but he will get there. But he strikes out because he pursued all of it, guys. It's like if you're out there drinking a lot, Solomon would say, don't go down that road. Not because he was against alcohol. He was against it as a way of life. Aren't you? Would you not like to please God? God gave this to me so that I can find pleasure in it? Yeah. But if I eat too much, like if I ate this in one sitting, what would this be? This is like a moral test for your pastor. How much should I eat? And so today we celebrate communion. And I mean celebrate because we reflect back on what Jesus did. In his sacrifice for us, he forgave us of all of our sins. He showed us grace. He showed us the intention of God, what brings God pleasure. Let me share this with you. What brought God pleasure was this. He wants a relationship with his creation, his humanity, his children. He wants you to know him and to love him and to show his pleasure. And his pleasure, folks, is what the world needs more than anything else. More than we need more sources of entertainment, more feeds on our phones. We need to seek the pleasure of the Lord Jesus Christ, seek the pleasure of God himself. We need the kindness of Christ. We need the forgiveness of Christ, the grace of Christ. These are the things that we should pursue. These are the things that ultimately will have meaning, because when you please God, he remembers. God remembers when you please him. Are you avoiding the things of God? Everything from friends to church to service to love to loving your enemy? Well, then you're a good Epicurean to avoid all pain and pursue only pleasure. When Jesus was betrayed on that night, he made note and gave thanks to God that the moment had come for him. And in your communion exploration, you can actually get to the wafer. I'm still having fun with these things. Give me a second. There is a wafer of bread in there. Hold on. Yes. This doesn't have much substance. As I reflect. But on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he asked, do this in remembrance of me. Go into this world and remember what Jesus had to do to show a new kind of love, to destroy the culture of his day. He broke it, he gave it to his followers, and he said, take and eat, this is my body. He took the cup of redemption. He gave thanks. He gave it to them and said, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. What you will find as a key to the meaning of life is that when you seek God's pleasure, your life becomes pleasurable. The real happiness you long for is found in the blessing of God. So some of you today, I would encourage you to pursue God with your life. And some of you today, I would encourage you to let go of the desires you have to seek self and seek to love others. And do this in the name of Christ.